Some may have heard the rumors. Disney is responsible for at least one live ghost town. The first instance of this lies in the Treasure Island Resort built by Disney in Baker's Bay, Bahamas. It wasn't always a ghost town, though. Initially, Disney's cruise ships docked at the resort, dropping off tourists for luxurious stays on an idyllic island. But despite the grand investment of $30 million, the resort was abandoned. Official reports claim the failure was due to shallow waters, making the area unsuitable for ships. They also blamed the Bahamian workers, accusing them of laziness. But these stories seem like convenient excuses. The truth behind Disney's abandonment of the resort was much more complicated, and the mystery surrounding it grew even deeper when we look at another Disney failure, Mowgli's Palace. In the late 1990s, Disney set its sights on creating a jungle-themed resort called Mowgli's Palace near Emerald Isle in North Carolina. Inspired by the character of Mowgli from the Jungle Book, the concept was extravagant. A massive Indian-style palace set amidst a jungle where guests would stay in a world of exotic wonder. But Mowgli's Palace was controversial from the start. Disney began buying up high-priced land, but the process was shady. The local government claimed eminent domain on homes, seizing properties, and selling them to Disney. At one point, a newly built house was condemned without explanation, fueling speculation that the project had ulterior motives. People referred to the land as Mickey Mouse Highway because of its mysterious seizure. When Disney presented their concept art, the backlash was immediate. The resort, which featured tribal staff in loincloths and jungle themes, was a hard sell in a wealthy, somewhat conservative area of the southern U.S. One local even stormed the stage during a public meeting in outrage. Disney pushed ahead, demolishing homes and clearing land. Even the media, which had initially opposed the project, turned in favor of Disney, likely due to their influence over local outlets. Despite the controversy, construction on Mowgli's Palace was completed. Visitors actually stayed at the resort. The surrounding areas were inundated with tourists, adding to the stress of locals who already opposed the project. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, Disney shut the resort down. No one really knew why. The closure was met with strange relief by those who had opposed the resort in the first place. The Disney empire had sunk millions into a failure, and the loss was almost seen as karmic justice. This closure would have been forgotten, except for one detail. A blog post about Treasure Island in the Bahamas caught the attention of an urban explorer who decided to see if Mowgli's Palace had been left in a similar state of abandonment. Intrigued by the blog about Treasure Island, the urban explorer set off on their own journey to Mowgli's Palace, hoping to capture some photographs and document the eerie remains of the resort. Research into the resort proved difficult. Disney had scrubbed any mention of Mowgli's Palace from official records, and locals, whether new arrivals or longtime residents, were unhelpful. It was as if the place had been erased from history. The explorer eventually found a decades-old promotional map sent to Disney visitors in the late 1980s. With this, they set off on a journey, guided only by the old map and their curiosity. After a long drive, The explorer reached the front gates of Mowgli's palace. The gates were enormous, monolithic wooden supports cut from what seemed to be giant sequoias. They were worn down by time, covered in gouges from woodpeckers, and decayed by burrowing insects. A metal sheet with the words "Abandoned by Disney" was nailed to the gates. The overgrown entryway felt like a warning. The resort grounds were just as abandoned, with overgrown palm trees, rotting banana plants, and forgotten debris. There was an unsettling mix of nature and neglect, as the once pristine gardens had been swallowed by weeds and blackened mushrooms. The most striking feature was a statue of Baloo, the bear from the Jungle Book, frozen in a jubilant wave. His face was now blank and covered in bird droppings. As vines crept up around him, it was a sad, eerie reminder of the past. The main palace building was in a state of decay. The exterior had been defaced with graffiti, and the front doors were missing, stolen long ago. Inside, the explorer found an empty shell. It was stark and barren, every room stripped of value, save for the rotting remnants of furniture and broken walls. The kitchen was no different. Industrial food prep areas sat in ruins, with every glass surface broken, doors knocked off their hinges, and a lingering stench of decay. The freezer was empty, and metal hooks swung slowly, almost as if moved by some unseen force. The bathrooms mirrored the rest of the building's decay. Toilets and sinks had been smashed, and a foul smell of stagnant water filled the air. It was clear that whatever had happened here, the place had been abandoned and forgotten for too long. While exploring, the adventurer heard what seemed like faint voices from a nearby room. The whispers were unclear, but one phrase stood out.
I didn't believe it. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you.
The unsettling sounds made the adventurer nervous, but they pressed on, convinced there was nothing more to uncover. That is, until something in the courtyard caught their eye. In the courtyard, the explorer noticed a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 80 feet long, coiled upon a pedestal. The sunlight was just right for a photograph, so the explorer snapped a few shots. But then, to their horror, the python moved. Slowly and deliberately, it lifted its head, looked directly at the explorer, and then slithered off the pedestal and into the trees. It became clear that Disney had released exotic animals onto the grounds. A reptile house had been marked on the old floor plan, and the snakes were likely part of that strange, abandoned section of the resort. The adventurer froze in disbelief, slowly backing away as the massive snake disappeared into the trees. The explorer found a staircase leading underground to a locked area marked "Mascots Only." Breaking the lock with relative ease, they entered a surprisingly untouched space. The area was dark, but the flickering fluorescent lights overhead provided just enough illumination. Inside, the explorer found an array of Disney costumes hanging on the walls. Strange, cartoon-like cadavers, frozen in time. Among them was a Mickey Mouse costume, lying on the floor in the center of the room, its fur shedding and its face twisted in an unnatural way. This was when things took a darker turn. The adventurer noticed a human skull, which had fallen from one of the mascot heads. The sudden discovery shocked them, but they had to take a picture of it to document what had been left behind. Just as the adventurer was about to leave, the Mickey Mouse costume, its eyes blackened and its smile warped, began to move. The costume stood up, its limbs jerking unnaturally, and began approaching the explorer. The adventurer fumbled for their camera, capturing only a blurry silhouette on the screen. As the Mickey costume moved closer, the camera malfunctioned, the screen filling with dead pixels.
Want to see my head come off?
The voice of Mickey, perverse and unsettling, asked. The Mickey costume began pulling at its own head, working its gloved hands to tear it off. Blood, thick and yellow, poured from its neck as it continued to disassemble itself. The adventurer, now frozen with terror, turned and fled the scene, only looking back long enough to catch a glimpse of the final, horrifying message etched above the door. Abandoned by God. The adventurer never retrieved the photos from the camera. They never wrote about their experience. They knew the truth. Mowgli's palace was a place Disney didn't want anyone to know about, a place they didn't want anyone to enter or leave.